Hey there, welcome back to Mysteries Channeled. Today I kind of want to talk about propaganda in the US. In times like these, when headlines and narratives are taken without question, many people, myself included, wonder, can I trust what is being reported? I, for one, take everything with a grain of salt. For instance, we're in the middle of a pandemic right now, and at the very beginning of it, it seemed like every hour the news was changing. Part of that is because as news is coming in, they're just reporting it without actually checking anything, or they're building up on what they already know. And part of it is that they're just saying whatever the hell they want to say, just so that they can get something out there so people continue to watch. It has no bearing on what is honestly happening out there. So you get this flood of information that's hard to make sense out of, and sometimes I'm at a loss at what to believe. There is something I've noticed though, and it really, really bothers me, and it's that when there are people who question information that is given by so-called trusted sources, they are shamed relentlessly. The public at large descends upon them in fury, belittling them, questioning their education, their sanity, and even going to the extent of blaming them for whatever the hell is going on. Like, if you question anything at all, it's probably your fault. And I just want to know, when did questioning information become so taboo? When did we become a society of people that will so easily turn on those that distrust questionable information? Real question here, because it wasn't always this way. I've done videos on topics like this before, and they are rarely popular, but I feel compelled to do them regardless. One of the main reasons some people don't readily accept information put out by mass media is because the CIA had a hand in the news that we hear and read basically since the inception of their agency. I'll give you some examples of how and when they've influenced the media. I'll also give you my thoughts on why. I recently watched a documentary. It's called Out of the Shadows. I highly recommend it for everyone. I'll put a link to the video in my description box below. It touches on this aspect and other highly disturbing aspects of how we are being manipulated through the media, journalism, and how it's changed over the last 60 years. This video was called The Smith-Mundt Fairness Doctrine and Fake News. The video goes over ways the media changed to become the propaganda machine that it is now, owned by conglomerates that are owned by just, a couple of people at the very top. This video goes over why, when watching the news, you see little clones in every newsroom saying the exact same thing, to the words being used, where emphasis is placed, to the literal breath that they take in a sentence. Have you ever noticed that every news agency uses the same pictures and the same footage? An example would be how they use the Italian ER in saying that it was the NYC ER. It's almost like there is one reporter for the country, hell, maybe even the world. They write their story, they take pictures and video, they copy and paste it to every agency out there, and voila. There you go, folks. You got the whole story right there, right? In my last video, the one I was talking about, the Smith-Mundt one, I blamed the government basically for changing the laws that were once in place to make American people receive honest, equitable, balanced information on controversial issues. These laws, the Smith-Mundt Act and the Fairness Doctrine, were put in place to make sure the American people were not propagandized. Something that I didn't mention in that video because I didn't know the half of it. And to be honest, I still don't know the half of it, is that the CIA, even when it was illegal to propagandize the public, did so anyway, countless times. I said when it was illegal is because back in 2013, President Obama authorized the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act. This modernization to the Smith-Mundt Act allowed governments to place propaganda in free public discourse. That's right, people. It's no longer illegal for the government to out and out lie to the American public through all forms of media. Some people know this, others don't. Many don't even care. But you should, because it affects everything you know about the world, your country, your health, your rights. Stew in that for a moment. Simmer in the stew. Let it really sink in. One of the agencies that use propaganda in the public is the CIA. I'm sure there are other agencies that do it as well, but the CIA takes the cake in this arena. I have labeled them a cabal before, and I stick to that assessment. Operation Mockingbird. Operation Mockingbird is when the CIA begins recruiting American news organizations and journalists to become spies and disseminators of propaganda. The effort is headed by Frank Wisner, Alan Dulles, Richard Helms, and Philip Graham. Graham is the publisher of the Washington Post. which becomes a major CIA player. Eventually, the CIA's media assets will include ABC, NBC, CBS, Time, Newsweek, Associated Press, United Press International, Reuters, Hearst newspapers, Scripps Howard, and many, many more. In fact, if you watched Out of the Shadows, you know that I don't think there's one that hasn't been touched. I don't think there's one clean news organization out there. I'm probably wrong, but if there is, they're not conglomerates. They're small-time people still, doing journalism. By the CIA's own admission, at least 25 organizations and 400 journalists were their assets. So what is the point of the CIA? Today's primary purpose is to collect, analyze, evaluate, disseminate foreign intelligence, and to perform covert actions. In truth, maybe some of this goes on, but there's another function they perform as well. Before you think that this is a conspiracy, let me assure you that you can go onto their website and look up everything I'm saying, everything I'm talking about. They don't put it in there nicely. You're going to have to search a little bit, but everything I'm talking about is on their own website. In fact, I'll put a lot of links in the description box below, but I don't even think that there are enough characters where I can actually put in all the links to the stuff I'm talking about. What is the other thing that they do? They destabilize governments. And I sometimes wonder if this is their actual core function. Known governments that have been destabilized are Iran in 1953, Guatemala in 1954, North Vietnam, 1945 through the Vietnam War, Iraq in 1963, then again in 2003, Cambodia, 1955 through 1970, Laos, 1958 through 60, Ecuador, 60 to 63, the Congo, 1960, Brazil, 62 to 64, the Dominican Republic in 63, Bolivia in 64, then again in 1971, Indonesia in 75, that was the second attempt. The first attempt was in 1958. They succeeded the second time. Ghana, 1966. Chile, 64 through 73. Overthrowing a democratically elected president to install a dictator. Greece, 1967. Australia, 1973. Jamaica, 1976 through 80. Chad, 81 through 82. Grenada, 1983. Fiji, 1987. Nicaragua, 81 through 90. Panama, 1989. Bulgaria, 1990. Albania, 1991. Afghanistan, 80s, and then again in 2001. Venezuela in 2002. Haiti in 2004. Libya in 2011. These are just the ones they succeeded in. There's about another 40 countries that they attempted and didn't quite work out the way they wanted it to. I bet you're wondering, why would I bring up this list of countries and leave out Cuba? They didn't oust Castro. They didn't get what they wanted. That's what I'm saying. There are a lot of countries that go through hell on earth. They face civil war, system breakdown, and guess what it all started with? Propaganda. Propaganda by their own governments as well, and propaganda by ours, specifically the CIA. When you literally can't trust your government to disclose truth, is there any hope? So I want to show you this article here. This article talks about the different ways that the media can be manipulated and is by the CIA. 1, you literally pay them to say what you want. You write the story the way you want it presented, and then you pay them to present it as if it was theirs. 2, you pretend to be a journalist. You are a spy for the CIA whose cover is being a journalist. And 3, you set up a system where the news is filtered by you, the CIA, before it's released. This man on the right here, his name is Robert Bloom. I've talked about him in past videos, and his name is one that you should remember. If you ever run across his name or anything about him, save it to your hard drive or just send it to me because I want to know. Because I am telling you, a lot of the debauchery and absolute insanity that began with this agency at its inception is tied to that guy. I did another video where I tie him to the possible drugging and poisoning of James Forrestal. Once Forrestal is out of the way, Bloom and other cronies were able to line the CIA with people that would know no bounds to absolutely going as low as you can imagine to get what they want. I think the agency, instead of the American people, I think what the CIA's foremost goal, besides, overthrowing governments, is to protect themselves. Now I'm going to go over a couple of Freedom of Information Act documents. Section 8 of this paper. Labor is the striking head in Europe in its fight against communist control of labor unions. The weapons needed for this kind of warfare are gasoline, printing presses, newsprint, and most of all, a news service which would furnish information on the psychologic and political front. Considerations must be given to the best method of handling these facilities. And then we'll skip down to 14. Radio has a vital function in the use of propaganda. The purchase of time in Radio Luxembourg and the installation of a radio station in Western Europe would be of great practical value. While American broadcasters could supplement those countries concerned, the accent must be made by those countries who are fighting with us. And then there's this one. I'm not going to read this entire document, but it's about DCI Dulles leaking highly classified information to the press. Now, he did exactly what Julian Assange did, relevant to that time period. No, it wasn't emails and digital trails by someone exposing war crimes. It was the director of Central Intelligence leaking numbers on Russian ballistic intercontinental missiles to the press, as well as going into the detail of what he believed the American military, if they could even handle it. The director of Central Intelligence was the leak. Now, why would he release highly classified information? To create fear in the American people, to manipulate an outcome for some unforeseen plan that was already in motion. This briefing is about a Senate speech implicating Dulles on leaking the information. But really, when you're reading it, it's a freaking tragedy. It's like a sad comedy where nothing happens to them at all. Nothing. Except for the Senate gets to argue about who resents more tremendously the fact that secret information was leaked. And I am not even joking. I'll link it in the description. Go ahead and read it. It is something to behold. Only time anything happens is if you are not part of their machine to disclose information. You need their permission. And if you don't have it, it's Gitmo, Russia, or death. Now you may be thinking, what's changed? If they've been doing this for so many years, does it matter? Maybe look at it a different way. If you bought a car from a car lot, a used car, and you later found out that they lied to you about the mileage, they rolled it back and sold you a vehicle knowingly charging you for a car that needed significantly more maintenance, a car that wouldn't last nearly as long as you thought it would. In this situation, you may have a solution. Legally, you could take the lot to court for swindling you. But what if it was completely legal for them to lie to you in the process of selling a car? Is there any recourse at that point? If they didn't break any law when it came to lying to you, what can you do besides hope to God that they're honest, knowing that they're not? I mean, I think about this stuff all the time, and I just wonder, what can we do? I don't know the exact answers, but I think that putting pressure on your local government, contacting the top of the government, I swear to God, it does nothing. You have to put extreme pressure on your local government for answers to these questions. Literally call them, text them, leave them a message, email them. Better yet, go on to social media and straight up ask them for the truth. Bring up the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act. Ask if it's completely legal for the American people to be propagandized by their own government. Then really listen to their answers. Research what they say. Ask some more questions. In fact, this is one that I think is a great question to ask anyone who is in government, who's elected. Who is the biggest contributor to your campaign? Just for the hell of it. Drop mainstream media. TV is absolutely nothing but propaganda. Find other ways to get information. Luckily, we live in a time where it's information overload. And I know sometimes you're thinking well, how can I trust anyone? I'm just saying, when Venezuela was turning into the shit show that it was becoming, guess who I watched? I watched a independent journalist on YouTube. It's a little group called We Are Change. They're not for everyone, and they're not the only ones that I watch, but I watched them because they actually went there. Instead of on the news that had grainy footage of people overrunning farms and just throwing out what they thought was going on. No, these people actually went down there. They interviewed locals. They had their own camera setup. They literally recorded and gave context to what they were reporting. So I trusted them. And I do that with a lot of other people as well. Find your own independent journalists. I think you'd be surprised at how many of them are out there and how knowledgeable they are. And the fact that they actually have real stories to tell you, not, quasi commercials or trying to manipulate what you think is right and wrong. And I think we should also take a really hard look at those countries I mentioned earlier. Some of them lived through hell for decades before dragging themselves out of third world misery. Some of them never recovered, ever. And just remember, propaganda was used in all those places to sway events that led to the dissolution of human rights. Okay, enough of my rant. Thank you as always for watching. If you liked what you watched, please leave me a like and subscribe and share my information. Have yourselves a very great day.